Hello, old school comic book reviews. Okay, today I have Cloak and Dagger. This is the original mini-series from 1983. Cloak and Dagger are a couple of pretty interesting characters. I guess they originally appeared in Peter Parker: The Amazing Spider-Man, and kind of got gained enough of a following or interest or whatever, or buzz or whatever you want to say to get their own series. It started out with this miniseries. Then I know they had an ongoing for a minute, and then after that they ended up sharing a comic called Strange Tales with Doctor Strange for a moment. Basically about the characters, I actually think they're pretty interesting characters. One character is there's Cloak, there's Dagger. Cloak has powers that involve, darkness. Dagger has powers that involve light, there's the whole kind of duality going on. One is dark, one is light, one is white, one is black, one is a girl, one's a guy, and so on and so forth. And I really like that whole kind of duality thing going on there. Basically what it is, the way these characters operate or whatever, they're kind of more vigilant. They're kind of they have superpowers, but they're really more street level heroes, and they kind of met out some of that street justice, basically what their deal is their origin is more or less, there were a couple of teenage runaways. They were Tyrone and Tandy, and they were kidnapped by the mob. The mob was trying to create a new street narcotic, a new addictive drug, and they were experimenting on like homeless people and runaways and so on and so forth, people that the mainstream society wouldn't miss. And the side effect from the experiments gave them superpowers. Now, from my understanding, at one point they meaning Marvel Comics, kind of tweaked the origin to say that Tandy and Tyrone were actually mutants, and the drugs just basically kick-started their powers. But I think, and I'm not 100% certain on this because I haven't been really following closely, they're kind of returning to mainstream Marvel comics, so I've kind of like peeped it a little bit, but I think they've gone back to the idea that their powers come from the drugs and the chemicals and so on and so forth. So anyway, this is a pretty interesting series. It was just 4 issues here, and it's kind of introduction to who the characters are and the kind of environment that they operate in and so on and so forth. Like I said, they're more street level heroes, so they basically take down pushers and pimps and drug dealers and mob guys. They deal with them pretty harshly. They also, people who prey on like young people and runaways and stuff like that. So the first issue, we kind of get them taking down, basically we kind of get introduced before that. We kind of get introduced to a character called Detective Bridget O'Reilly, who is, this female detective who's kind of heard a little bit about what's going on in the street. She's trying to figure out who this Cloak and Dagger are. At one point she actually does confront them and, just basically says to them something, at some point later on, something happens where she's like, this tragic thing happened, because of your vigilante justice. If you would just let the law take care of it, this wouldn't have happened, and they basically kind of reply with, well, where was the law when we needed the law, la-di-da, that's why we do what we do. Another interesting character that's here is Reverend Delgado, who runs this church in the neighborhood, and he kind of, takes pity on them because he sees that, these were formerly, lost kids or whatever, but at the same time, he's not sure if he should or shouldn't judge them for what they do, like he's not sure if he really approves, but he can see how they were driven to do what they do. And they kind of like rest out at his church and so on and so forth in between their, so-called missions. The first issue, basically, like I said, we get introduced to the characters and things like that. We see Cloak and Dagger take down a group of chicken hawks, a group of guys who were, going to take a couple other runaways in, and it's implied, you read between the lines, it's implied that they were going to, rape and abuse these two kids or whatever. The next issue has them tracking down a guy who's like putting poison in aspirin, The next issue has a bit where they kind of, they kind of explore the idea of Cloak and Dagger's powers and how they kind of, sort of sustain each other, Cloak is, he has to kind of like absorb things and absorb energy, sometimes people, to kind of like sustain himself, and then it's shown how, Dagger's powers kind of, calm him down a little bit and is able to, like I said, kind of keep him going and so on and so forth. But basically what happens is Cloak kind of runs off because he's all upset, like, oh, what a monster I've become and blah, 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 blah. And he like runs off away from himself, from her, I should say. And so he's all weak and tired. And then she's getting weak and tired because she's still trying to use her powers to save him, but he's so far away, and she's sending her whatever energy out into the ether or whatever, and maybe it's finding him, maybe it isn't, la-di-da-di-da. And you see how they kind of become, weak without each other. There's also like this fight in the church, what has to do with, or it's not a fight in the church, well, I guess it is a fight in the church, but it's not a fight, some kind of like, I guess new wave punk rock hipsters or whatever they're supposed to be try to rob the church, so that's where the big battle comes from there. And the fourth issue is basically a detailed flashback to the origin and backgrounds of the two characters, where we see where Tandy was this rich girl who comes from this really wealthy family, but her parents are really negligent and they don't care about her and they never really wanted her, and she's just kind of like this unwanted person or whatever, and all the other people are like really shallow and materialistic and so on and so forth, so that's why she runs away. Then you see about Tyrone is from the inner city, or he's from the inner city, and the people around him are trying to get him involved in gangs and doing stick-ups and things like that, but he doesn't want any part of that. He's thinking maybe he can get maybe he can get out of it through playing ball, but his big problem is, we see how he's kind of a shy kid. He has a serious stuttering problem, and that's something that's going to hold him back and so on and so forth. And like I said, things happen to him, things happen to her, and both of them run away. They end up, kind of meeting by coincidence, and then there's the whole thing where, like I said, they get captured by the mob and so on and so forth, and they get their powers and start enacting vengeance and so on, and blah, 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 blah. It's a real interesting series. It's a real interesting setup, you know what I mean? I can see how other people, had an appeal for the characters. I've got an appeal for the characters. The actual comic books itself, how do I want to say this? Well, it's a comic book from 1983. You know what I mean? It's plagued by scenes where people over-explain themselves. There's a little bit too much of the old, we are new wave hookers come to rob your church, type of stuff. You know what I mean? But other than that, though, it's pretty good. I mean, the stories work kind of almost like little one and done stories, but they also work as a more expansive, overall arc. It works as one thing. I really, really, really like the Rick Leonardi art here. I wanted to kind of scan some of the pages of the actual comics that I got, but I'm having some issues with my scanner and uploading stuff like that, so I wasn't able to do it. But it's really nice. I really like the way he draws figures here. Everybody's kind of lean and whatever, and it's pretty stylized, but at the same time, it's real pleasing to the eye. I like his storytelling methods. He's done some really interesting things with like vertical panels versus horizontal panels, and everything's really clear. You're never confused about where people are, what's going on from scene to scene, and where people are into relationship with each other, and how we get from point A to point B. So it's really nice. Now, I know at one point this was collected in trade, just these 4 issues, and I'm pretty sure that's way out of print. But I think Marvel has since re-released this, and I don't know. I'm sure it's not just this story. I'm sure they probably have some of the other early Cloak and Dagger stuff. I think the trade is called Children of Light or Children of Darkness or whatever, but I don't know exactly which stories are there. But I'm sure it's probably these stories and some other things. And even if you can't get that, I would say search for the trade, like on eBay or Amazon or something like that, or just go to your local comic book shop and just ask, because you can probably find the original issues for pretty cheap. I had to replace one of my copies not very long ago, and I was able to find it for like $2 or whatever. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for listening. Leave any comments you want to leave, and you have a good one.